All right, so we're now at the top of the hour, and I'm going to get started. But first, I have a few announcements to make and need to remind everyone of our house rules for interaction during this webinar. So Circle is housed in the College of Humanities at the University of Arizona. It is one of 16 language resource centers funded by the U.S. Department of Education under Title VI. Our mission is to support research related to language teaching and learning and provide educators with quality resources for teaching as well as professional development for the meaningful integration of culture, language, and literacy. Our Language Teacher Symposium, LATES in short, will take place on October 28th of this fall. Please check our website for additional information. In February 2024, we will be hosting our 9th International Conference on the Development and Assessment of Intercultural Competence, ICC for short. The focus of this hybrid conference will be intercultural learning, global citizenship, and peace building. We will be posting the schedule of presentation as well as registration and lodging information by mid-November, so please stay tuned. This fall, we are hosting a webinar series focused on maximizing learners' careers readiness in language programs. And today's webinar is the first in this series and is titled Community-Based Learning Outcomes, Positioning Language Students for Success. Our presenters are Joan Clifford and Deb Reisinger. During the presentation, please remember to use the chat to say hello and interact with your colleagues, but use the Q&A to ask questions to our presenters. You can post your questions at any time during the presentation, and Joan and Deb will stop along the way and take some time to answer these. So who are our presenters today? Well, first, Dr. Joan Clifford is Associate Professor of the Practice in Spanish in the Department of Romance Studies and Director of Duke Service Learning. She also regularly teaches courses that include a community-based component and advises undergraduate students conducting independent research projects tied to health issues within Latin communities. Her experiences abroad include directing global education programs in Chile, Mexico, and Spain. She co-authored with her colleague, Deb Reisinger, Community-Based Language Learning. Deb Reisinger is Professor of the Practice in French in the Department of Romance Studies at Duke University. She is Director of Duke's Language Outreach Initiatives, Associate Director of the Markets and Management Studies Program, and affiliate faculty in the Duke Global Health Institute. She's passionate about establishing connections between language proficiency and the disciplines. She co-authored with her colleague Joan Clifford, Community-Based Language Learning, and is lead author of the textbook Affaires Globales, s'engager dans le monde professionnel en français, niveau avancé. She chairs the World Language Advisory Committee to the College Board and has directed study abroad programs for over 20 years. She was recently awarded the Chevalier des Palmes Académiques from the French Republic. Joan and Deb, thank you again for accepting our invitation. The floor is now yours.
So welcome, everyone. We are delighted that you've chosen to join us today to talk about community-based language learning outcomes and positioning our language students for success. We're going to kick off with a short poll to get a sense of how your department engages in experiential education and also about your sense of the state of language study. So take just a moment to fill this out. And as you do, I'm going to talk about the objectives that we have today. So hopefully you can multitask. We have a number of objectives this afternoon that we'll be going over. We'll begin by examining current trends in U.S. higher education as they relate to language enrollments. And then we'll then move to define career readiness and explore how it maps onto various types of experiential learning and explore how and the related student learning outcomes. We'll then examine how successful experiential programs in English talk about their programming, and we'll conclude by considering new ways to position our learning goals that will attract students to our language programs and prepare them for the workplace. So we've got quite a lot to get through today. And as Beatrice said, we will have a couple spaces for breaks for you to do some reflection as well. And then we'll be able to address the questions at that time. So as soon as we're ready, the results of the poll, we'd love to see. So it looks like most of you all have study abroad. There is a little bit of service learning and volunteering, about a third of people, a little bit of student-to-student mentorship. And I'm unable to go further down to see more.
There's about 69% in language and culture clubs, 8% for language hall, 17% for department ambassadors. So quite a range of activities happening, but definitely we see a strong showing for study abroad and the language culture clubs. And question number 2, how explicitly does your department connect language study and career development? 19% said not at all explicitly, 58% somewhat explicitly, and 22% very explicitly. So we're obviously all in the process of really being more thoughtful about building in these career readiness competencies. The third question, how concerned are you about declining language enrollments at your institution? Not at all concerned, 11%, somewhat concerned, 39%, very concerned, 50%. So that's showing our motivation for having this conversation today.
You're in the right place. So this is great to get a sense of where y'all are. We are also there. So let's begin by examining current trends in U.S. higher education and in language enrollments. The high costs of college and the loans that students must take out, combined with an uncertain job market. Because of this, college has become both a commodity and an investment. And so it's small wonder that students and their families are focused on making direct connections between college majors and jobs. And numerous reports indicate that this is exactly what's happening. Computer science majors have skyrocketed, for instance. This situation has led to a rise in credentialism and in pre-professionalism, in which students seek to quantify educational achievements through certificates, diplomas, and internships, sometimes at the expense of critical competencies and skills. This is where community-based programming comes in. Almost 80% of the 2023 college graduates participated in some kind of experiential learning, most of which were internships. In addition, for students who may not be able to study abroad for financial reasons, we're seeing domestic service learning increasingly touted as an alternative immersive environment, offering a more equitable option for some students. And in terms of the global reach of higher education, there has been a steady and significant decline in internationalization. According to a 2022 report from the American Council on Education, the number of colleges that include international or global education in their mission statements or strategic plans has declined over the years from 51% to 43%. Those with international education among the top 5 priorities in their strategic plan also dropped even more significantly from 52% in 2012 to just 36% a decade later. I was personally really surprised to read this. So if we examine these trends at a curricular level, that is particularly relevant to this audience, a 2021 report by the American Council of Trustees and Alumni showed that only 12% of U.S. campuses require degree-seeking students to demonstrate intermediate level proficiency in a world language. So let's look at language study a little closer. From 2013 to 2016, the MLA recorded the second largest drop in language enrollments, a 9.2% decline. And we've been talking about this for a lot. New figures from 2020, which are a snapshot, indicate even greater concern, with enrollments dropping 15.4% overall, the largest decrease since the beginning of the census in 1958. There are some anomalies, of course. Korean, Hawaiian, and ASL all grew. But languages like German suffered a 32% drop in enrollments, French 22%, and Spanish lost 15.2%. Given the sheer number of students who are enrolled in these specific courses and taking these languages, we see a decline of over 140,000 course seats. So when student numbers fall, market forces often take over. And with a significantly smaller student pool, it is less cost effective, quite frankly, to teach the same number of courses and the same variety of courses. We see this phenomenon clearly play out in program closures. Between 2009 and 2013, higher education lost just one language program. But from 2013 to 2016, it lost 651 programs. Updated statistics on program closures have not yet been released, but we can point to the large-scale cuts at West Virginia University, a flagship institution, as indicative of this negative trend. In the West Virginia report, administrators concluded that student interest in foreign languages was, quote, very low and declining. They write, and I quote from the report, due to the decline in the discipline nationally and regionally, and the lack of student demand for these programs, the institution has made a mission decision that this method of language instruction is not aligned with student interest and is recommending the discontinuation of all programs in this department and the dissolution of this department, and I unquote. There is a lot to unpack here, and a lot of scholars have already done so. What I would like to underline here are the reasons given: enrollment declines, which we've just seen, and student interest. So let's take a look briefly at student interest and motivation and what's been going on in that area. In a longitudinal study on foreign language learning motivation in college students, Boos and Walter found that today's students are less intrinsically motivated to learn languages, and that despite their increasing wish to become proficient, their efforts to engage with language learning decreased over the course of a year that they were studying. They attributed this to a lack of self-efficacy and a lack of preparation. And this particular study, by the way, predates the pandemic. So what else do we know? What is happening? According to national reports, more and more students are deciding to forego college to the tune of a 10% drop in enrollments. A 2023 EAB report indicates that post-pandemic, students feel increasingly unprepared for college, both mentally and academically. To address the issue, the authors of that report suggest that colleges highlight career services and opportunities for internships and job placement. So we'll put a pin in that. What about business needs? A whopping 90% of US employers rely on employees with language skills other than English, and a full 25% of companies have lost business due to a lack of world language skills. That's a lot. Given these factors, we may wish to better integrate instrumental motivations, studying a language to obtain a specific job, for instance, with the kind of integrative motivations associated with experiential learning, wherein learners desire to communicate with or join the L2 user community. So let's look at a specific example, which is translation and interpretation. According to Kalina and Lafford, these two competencies are two of the most common tasks that second language Spanish learners engage in when placed with local organizations and businesses, whether through internships or service learning projects in the United States. When we consult the US Bureau of Labor and Statistics, we see a projected 20% growth in translation industries. And in a similar suggestion, the language flagship asked US companies how to better prepare language students. And one of their suggestions was to have students certified for language skills without having to be literature majors. And that was their specific suggestion, no literature. So this is a really great example of lost potential. We have students engaging in these tasks in their coursework and employers seeking qualified candidates, and yet we're not capitalizing on this to draw students to our programs. As Simonson notes, we must get better at creating pathways for students that certify them in professional spaces, emphasizing the kinds of skills, such as mediation, that almost exclusively happen in second language contexts. So we're going to turn to the next section now, in which we will define career readiness competencies. The National Association of Colleges and Employers, or NACE, defines career readiness as a, quote, foundation from which to demonstrate requisite core competencies that broadly prepare the college educated for success in the workplace and lifelong career management, unquote. They have noted 8 competencies, and as you listen to their descriptions, consider the ways in which your program may address each of them, because we're going to come back to this in just a moment. The first one, career and self-development, refers to networking, personal and professional learning, and awareness of one's strengths and weaknesses. Communication includes clearly and effectively exchanging information, ideas, facts, and perspectives with persons inside and outside of an organization. Critical thinking includes identifying and responding to needs based on an understanding of situational context and logical analysis of relevant information. Equity and inclusion competencies refer to the awareness, attitude, knowledge, and skills required to equitably engage and include people from different local and global cultures. It also includes engaging in anti-racist practices that actively challenge the systems, structures, and policies of racism. Leadership recognizes and capitalizes on personal and team strengths to achieve organizational goals. Professionalism includes the understanding and demonstrating effective work habits and acting in the interest of the larger community and workplace. Teamwork builds and maintains collaborative relationships to work effectively toward common goals while appreciating diverse viewpoints and shared responsibilities. And finally, technology means understanding and leveraging technologies ethically to enhance efficiencies, complete tasks, and accomplish goals. So now we'd like to ask whether and in what ways your program explicitly teaches and or names these competencies as part of your student learning outcomes or as part of your language major objectives. And as you consider these, I would ask you to please put them in the chat. I'm curious to see if any of the folks here have specific outcomes that are named that relate to these in their courses or in their programs. Okay, great. So I'm seeing leadership. Someone said most of them. Great. Communication and critical thinking. A reference to a German program that has them. Critical thinking. We are good critical thinkers, I think, in general in language. Equity and inclusion. Great. Okay. Some folks explicitly already naming these in their courses, so they're a step ahead of the game. Leadership. We are preaching to the choir, Joan. This is good news. Okay. So moving on, to develop these competencies, these 8 competencies that we've listed, NACE consulted over 600 employer members over a 6-year period. 96% of the respondents indicated that communication was very or extremely important for recent graduates. When students were polled about how they rate themselves in this category, almost 80% of them self-declared as being very proficient in communication. In contrast, only 47% of employers shared this view. So there's clearly a gap in preparation, in competencies, and perhaps in self-awareness, which is the first competency that they list. So what do we do now? This webinar series aims to answer that question by offering multiple ways to adapt our programs to changing landscapes and students. Darcy Lear is going to talk about integrating career readiness into first and second year programs, and Diana Ruggiero will speak to integrating WLSP, or World Languages for Specific Purposes, in language programs. Our talk today is going to focus on framing service learning, internship, and community-based experiences as career preparation. And I am going to turn it over to Joan to begin to talk about describing the types of experiential learning and related student learning outcomes.
Thank you, Deb. I wanted to take a pause just to see if there were any questions that have surfaced in the first phase of our conversation today.
No questions yet.
Okay, well, please feel free to post them in the Q&A, and we will be sure to take another pause before we reach the end of the hour, where we're going to open it up for questions. So what is experiential education? Experiential education is a teaching philosophy that informs many methodologies in which educators purposefully engage with learners in direct experience and focused reflection in order to increase knowledge, develop skills, clarify values, and develop people's capacity to contribute to their communities. Within higher education, there are many forms of experiential education. There are many ways that students can have that direct experience in communities. Here are a few of the possible formats that you might have on your campus. Some, as Deb has mentioned, have fluctuated in popularity in recent years, and others, such as internships, social entrepreneurship, and fieldwork, are leading the way in positioning students for success in their careers. Today, we will use a variation of service learning as the central model of our exploration of career readiness competencies in language courses. Community-based language learning is the form of experiential education that we will more fully explore today. It connects L2 students with communities that speak the target language. From our experience and established research, the most transformative experiences are born out of curriculum that is based on the critical service learning model. According to Tania Mitchell, it is a model, quote, that is attentive to social change, works to redistribute power, and strives to develop authentic relationships, end of quote. The authors Davis, Kleiwer, and Nicolaides write in 2017 that the hope is that a, quote, generative reciprocity enables all stakeholders to join together synergistically to build capacities and produce outcomes that none could otherwise produce separately, end of quote. We want to see students engage in relationships that support the needs voiced within and by the community, and that these partnerships will move the needle on eliminating systems of inequities rather than supplying a Band-Aid for the needs in the community. Here are various ways for language learners to engage in community partnerships that will provide opportunities to improve their career readiness. Depending on your local community, the types of interactions possible with heritage and native speakers will vary. In our community, there are immigration and refugee services and organizations that provide community advocacy and social support services to speakers of French, Arabic, Spanish, Mandarin, Hindi, and other less commonly taught languages. The interactions require many types of collaborations, orientations, and preparation that must be negotiated by all stakeholders in the partnership. We are happy to elaborate on any of these examples, but let me briefly describe two of them. The example of community health outreach is work done with the county health department. The students joined community teams to go door to door to assist with a community health assessment that happens every 2 years. The students were involved in the process of designing the survey, taught how to administer the survey, they participated in the data collection, and then they helped disseminate the results. This process provided students with many different insights about how to develop and implement community-focused research. All of these skills were useful in building career-specific skills. The second example that I wanted to briefly outline is the work done with local public schools during the pandemic. It became very apparent very quickly that the school system needed immediate assistance with translations, even more urgent than normal. A group of colleagues who teach French, Arabic, Mandarin, and Spanish responded to the school system's request to provide bi-weekly translations of announcements for their central website. Students learned how to rapidly research and translate materials appropriately. The insights into language use and intercultural awareness were invaluable in providing learning opportunities that relate to professional contexts. Research has highlighted learning outcomes for community-based language learning that range from academic to professional to personal. And there are clear ways to connect these learning outcomes to our conversation today. Communication, critical thinking, and leadership skills are but a few of the learning outcomes that mirror the career readiness competencies. In order to fully engage in a conversation about how to expand how we talk about learning outcomes and career readiness competencies in community-based language learning, let's take a moment to consider the importance of how a narrative impacts perceptions of students considering experiential educational opportunities. So let's remind ourselves where we are in the agenda. We are going to now pivot and look at what service learning, social entrepreneurship, and the STEM fields can teach us about how to move forward in L2 community-based programming. Given current climate, we need to frame our language courses differently and talk about them differently. This contrast of how students perceive service learning in comparison with social entrepreneurship is the first of two examples that shed light on how beliefs and stereotypes impact the interest level of students. There is much more excitement connected to emerging social entrepreneurship courses than that associated with service learning. From 2013 to 2020, Ashoka U reported a 70% increase in social entrepreneurship education in universities offering this type of course. That's about 3,000 universities. Service learning has become more institutionalized and is not attracting new practitioners at the same high rates. The implication of seeing the rapid increase in interest in social entrepreneurship is that we cannot ignore students' perceptions about community engagement. We must think strategically about how to work closely with our students as they construct deeper and more nuanced understandings of their community engaged experiences, whether they are categorized as academic service learning or categorized as internships. Knowing that language study is dominated by females, we also need to pay attention to the fact that service learning is majority female. Taylor and Raykov in 2014 found significant gender differences among service learning course preferences, generally reflecting gendered occupational differences, with women demonstrating more interest in courses related to education, psychology, sociology, or nursing. Whereas men preferred those related to math, politics, economics, and research. These perceptions are fed by targeted choices of course descriptions and narratives. Gomez and Corrine in 2008 found that the entrepreneur was often framed as a, quote, warrior, a characterization that invoked a masculinized space and norms. Furthermore, an emphasis on risk tolerance as an important skill in social entrepreneurship may privilege male students, an assertion that is being explored within entrepreneurial literature. The language around entrepreneurship, the use of imagery, metaphors, and exemplars, according to Jones in 2014, was highly masculinized. And in general, the entrepreneurship learning experiences within higher education were often unwelcoming to female students. Language educators need to be aware of these trends in participation and beliefs by male and female students so that we can adopt new approaches to equally attract all genders. Another important consideration for gender inequities that we should include in our planning for community-based language learning are the pay disparities for internships. Internships receive a lot of attention as preparing students for success in their future careers. According to NACE, graduating seniors of the class of 2023 were actively engaged in experiential learning, with 79% reporting they participated in some form of experiential learning during their time at college. 79% participated in experiential learning during their time in college. That's a very high figure. Internships accounted for a significant portion of those experiences. Among the class of 2023 graduates, male students, white students, students who are not first generation, and students who were not Pell Grant recipients were more likely to participate in internships than other groups of students. So drilling down, males are most likely to participate in these. And of the men who did participate in internships, 76% were paid. Among women, only about half were paid. The interest in pre-professional career tracks and the gender disparities that we're tracking in higher education create a perfect storm that leads to declining interest in language study. By reframing our language curriculum and experiential learning outcomes, we can increase interest in language study. Could it be that offering integrative and even instrumental motivation can students more clearly see the benefits of learning language? One last case example that provides us with new ideas about how to talk about experiential learning is what is going on in the STEM fields. The examples here represent 3 courses offered in the Pratt School of Engineering at Duke University. They use language that is much more directly associated with career readiness competencies, such as problem solving, real-world clients, project-based, and human-centered design. This is a relevant example, not only because of the innovative use of learning outcomes and strategies, but also because, just like in the previous example that highlighted differences in trends for male and female enrollments, the same is true in this discipline. It is of note that according to the American Association of University Women, engineering and computer science, 2 of the most lucrative STEM fields, remain heavily dominated by men. Only 21% of engineering majors and 19% of computer science majors are women. I don't think that we can ignore that piece of the puzzle. We need to consider that we can adopt what we can adopt from these descriptions that might change how students think about language study.
In this last section, we will consider how to attract students in ways that prepare them to succeed in the workplace. To reframe our language, we can return to our national standards and the can-do statements from ACTFL, which provide numerous discrete examples of how students develop career competencies through language study. At the intermediate level, for instance, one can-do statement reads, I can work with a newcomer English language learner and compare how we perform a particular math operation. An advanced low speaking example reads, I can present the main issues related to topics of public health or safety and support my viewpoint on this issue with related evidence. Or I can write a brief article giving a rationale for dietary and exercise practices to promote healthy living. If you haven't looked at these can-do statements in a while, there are so many examples that map perfectly onto career readiness. Reframing our learning objectives in these ways can help students own their own learning as well and prepare them to talk about it in more coherent ways. The same goes for our syllabi. A typical community-based language learning syllabus might focus on developing intercultural competencies. A simple way to draw attention to what we already do by preparing our students through career readiness is to simply add an additional bullet to the student learning outcomes that explicitly names this outcome. We are going to develop skills that will prepare you to be career ready, and just add that to that so that they see it in front of them. It's a simple reminder, but it can be really helpful. So let's drill down a little bit more and turn to an example that is common in community-based language programs. A college class pairs its Spanish language students with a local middle school to support native speakers through mentoring and tutoring. This is by far the most common example that we see in service learning across the country. Students will interact in the L1 and the L2 with multiple goals, supporting the child's education, building a trusted relationship through mentoring, and sharing linguistic and cultural knowledge. So how could we frame this service activity in terms of career readiness competencies? We've given one example here related to career and self-development. A student in this capacity would demonstrate curiosity and the ability to seek more opportunities to learn about tutoring, such as strategies for teaching ESL, or maybe finding appropriate materials to engage the student more in the process. What might you put in other boxes? I'd like to just take a few minutes and then again in the chat to share examples for at least one or more of the competencies. And then Beatrice, if there are other questions popping up in the Q&A, we're happy to field those now.
Yeah, there are two questions in a Q&A. One is asked by SB Hamilton. In working with community partners, how do you set accurate expectations about the students' pragmatic language skills?
I feel like Joan should answer that because you work so closely with this in service learning, but I'm happy to add my own thoughts afterwards.
Sure. Well, it is very important to be as transparent as possible in terms of what your students are capable of and what are the expectations and needs at the organization itself. What I have found over the years is that there are actually lots of tasks that need to be accomplished in the community that are in English. Well, that's I apologize for the international audience if we're not having as diverse a group of examples as might be interesting to you, but we're using US as the base of our examples today with the community-based language learning. So you have to be as attentive to the needs of the community as possible. So when you have the contact with the community partner, hopefully you are negotiating perhaps a memorandum of understanding or some sort of a agreement of partnership that's going to identify the types of tasks that your students will be engaging with. And at that stage is when you really need to have the conversation about what is possible with the level of language student that is going to be working in the partnership. You can obviously work on development of vocabulary, you can do role plays, you can try to set the students on the path to appropriate types of interactions with the community members. But there are always situations that arise that can cause miscommunications and perhaps breakdown in certain tasks. So that's when the reflection piece of community-based language learning becomes such an obvious necessity in the process. We really want everyone to be thoughtful about the preparation, the orientation that the students receive, but also how you're helping them process the experience throughout the semester. So that's not answering completely the question about the linguistic preparation and their ability to negotiate in the community on task, but it's a challenging thing to anticipate. Once you have a partnership in place for a few semesters, then it's much easier to understand how your students are going to fit in, and as you're getting to know your students at the beginning of the semester, it's also very easy to understand who's going to be able to navigate which duties. Debbie, you want to contribute?
Yeah, I would just add that language learning outcomes are at the bottom of my list of student learning outcomes in these kinds of courses. So the main goal isn't for students to get their language skills better in the community. They will use their language most of the time. There will be days where they don't actually interact in French. In my case, some of them will be doing work in English, and that's perfectly fine. They're gaining cultural knowledge, they're gaining career readiness skills, they're understanding how to work kind of between languages in these third spaces. The language learning part tends to happen more in the classroom, in my case at least. And then those other community interactions can support that. And there are obviously other kinds of ways. So we're talking about a service learning model here. But if you were to pair your students, say, with someone abroad through some of these companies that set you up with, like Talk Abroad or Not to Column, or there's several other ones where you can kind of pair your students with someone else who is a native speaker of the language. In that case, your purpose is to help the students gain some kind of linguistic competency. And there, it's not an issue, obviously.
There is actually another question from Cecilia, and it's been voted by 2 people. She'd like to get some tips and ideas to find maybe grants or support for language conversation circles. So I think going beyond, maybe finding places where students can connect with community members. She says, yeah, they are paid conversation partners, but they're pricey. And I would add that the experience is oftentimes not quite the same. So if you could address this, that'd be great. Thank you.
I wish that I had a list of grants that were available nationally, but I do not. If anyone else in our from the participants today have suggestions, we're very interested in helping disseminate those suggestions. We find grants internally within Duke, and also on a more local level within North Carolina, because we're based in North Carolina. So unfortunately, I don't have a good answer for you.
There are other ways to work around that too. I know some colleagues of mine have asked students to pay a small fee. We used to pay $200-300 for books a semester. Many of us have gone to different kinds of models for teaching. And so adding a $25 or $30 fee to a student course is not necessarily a problem. So that is one option for certain kinds of institutions. Other folks have kind of networked with partners around the world and paired classrooms. So I've had my students do international exchanges with students who are living in Aix-en-Provence, and they meet 5 times during the semester. And it is absolutely free, and it is 100% like all of the things that come with volunteering, which means setting it up. We don't have a platform, so the students sort of run it themselves. But that's another way, but that takes a lot of legwork on the individual. I don't know of any other free ones that are out there, but they might be coming up in the chat.
Yeah, the COIL model is very interesting for this as well. If you're interested in a shared curriculum with another university in an international space. But there are also free conversation programs, platforms, if you can't do it locally. I know that we have had reading groups at a local library as well as a local church. So it could be that you could do this without a cost associated with using a platform.
I've not seen, someone actually in the chat started responding, so there might be some opportunities for folks to, someone is asking, I'm tuning in from a European vocational education perspective and was wondering whether there are examples of language learning entrepreneurship models for younger, non-academic learners.
I am drawing a blank there. I don't have any knowledge of those now.
Okay, so I think that's about it for now.
Okay.
It doesn't look like, maybe I'm wondering if for the current slide, if you could give maybe a couple more examples to get people to join in the conversation. It looks like that might not have been clear to, or maybe people may not have heard what you were asking them to do.
Yeah, I'm actually going to fill in the entire graph in just a moment, but I would like to take another minute to see if you all could come up with some that might map onto it. So again, we're in the context of pairing a class of Spanish language learners and the college level with middle school students who are native speakers of Spanish, and there's a tutoring situation going on. So like your students go there once a week to tutor kids. How can that opportunity, which is often framed as volunteering or I'm helping kids in the community, how can that be framed as career readiness? And how can it map onto these other examples specifically? So for instance, for communication, that might be a little bit easier to think of. And I'm also happy to just walk through a couple of examples. So maybe we'll do this. So once, yeah. Okay. So the idea here is that once you've kind of walked through these examples and kind of come up with your student learning outcomes, you want to think of ways that we can develop these a little bit more. So in this example for communication, you might ask students to make sure that they would show that they can ask, understand, and inform the lead teacher about student progress. So they're communicating not only with the student, but also with the teacher. There is considerable critical thinking happening when the student is anticipating the learning needs of the student that they're working with, and they're learning to solve problems logically. In terms of equity and inclusion, the student mentor would be advocating for including students and working to eliminate barriers. In terms of leadership, they might inspire and support students by being a role model. Professionalism would be some basic things, but also pretty important, following the dress code, being on time, acting with integrity. Teamwork would be collaborating with teachers toward larger learning goals, and that teamwork could also take place within the classroom. And in terms of technology, it might be identifying appropriate technology to use. Right. So we want to offer opportunities to practice these in the classroom, as this is going to build learners' skill and confidence. And to better understand which areas to develop to help students practice these skills, we really need to listen to community members. Last year, we conducted a number of surveys and focus groups with our community partners about their experiences working with our student volunteers. So this was a brave move on our part, I think, but I was really curious to see, we know that they want our students, but we also know that this can be fraught with a lot of other issues. So they came back loud and clear and said that the students bring really important skills in technology, and that they're generally very dependable and really creative in thinking outside of the box, coming up with solutions to problems, and they're pretty nimble on their feet. They also said that students often lack basic professionalism as well as humility. Specifically, they said that students do not always communicate appropriately with their partners, either orally or in writing. And they have difficulty picking up on cultural and professional cues, what somebody might call reading the room. So they might enter into a partner's home and they haven't noticed that all of the shoes are outside the house and they walk in with their shoes on. Or they might not know to adjust the register of their speech. In some cases, students also demonstrate a sense of entitlement or educational elitism. And they assume that they know more than their community partners, or that they have the perfect solution to a problem that they actually don't really understand. Community partners recognize that they play a part in training our students, but we don't want to lean on them too much. And we want to give them students who are a little bit more prepared than what we're hearing. So how can we better prepare our students to be successful? So the classroom activities can support students in developing career readiness skills and give them confidence to start off on the right foot. And those skills will transfer directly to the workplace. Thinking more broadly, then, we've developed here a list of classroom-based activities that cut across the content of community-based language programming to map onto career readiness skills. So to support career and self-development, students can work together to develop a rubric that provides a framework for eliciting formative feedback about their work. This activity also activates critical thinking and teamwork. So many of these categories will kind of blend together. This is a really great activity. If you've never created a rubric with your students, I highly recommend it. It's really interesting to hear what they think is important, and they often come up with better rubrics than I've ever written. To build communication as the semester progresses, you might have students compose and then practice an elevator pitch that presents their service experience using career-focused terms, much as we did in the tutoring example and kind of recalling what we learned about in the STEM examples. You might conclude this semester then by having them write a formal thank you letter that acknowledges what they learned. This is something that many kids of this generation have not learned how to do. I don't know why, but it's an important example. So you can just have them do that at the end of the semester. And again, giving them feedback on how does a formal letter look, and what is the right way to send this, and so on. Students sometimes have misconceptions about an organization's capacity to support their clients. And so to understand the roles that all of the stakeholders play, it's helpful to look at the organization's mission statement. This can be a really interesting activity to do together and along with the organization so that they see that the organization is not failing the client in some way, but that is actually not part of what they're supposed to be doing. Students can get very excited about solving the world's problems in 20 hours. To build equity competencies, you might imagine or examine a recent case study to debrief a miscommunication. You could draw on a recent example or experience within the community or with a community partner. And there are a number of models to help students process these. We really like the DEAL model. It's spelled DEAL, and it'll help students slow down and analyze a miscommunication or a misunderstanding that has happened. It's a great model for reflection. To outline expectations and a communication tree, you might have students develop a memorandum of understanding with your community partner. This kind of dialogue functions as an information gap activity that develops language mediation skills as well, right? So what do you expect me to do? What time should I arrive? These kinds of things. And then what happens when I haven't heard from the client in a week? What is the sort of communication pattern that needs to be established? These kinds of misunderstandings tend to characterize a lot of service learning if the MOU is not in place. So it's really a great idea to do this with your students. To practice professionalism, role plays can be really helpful. Sometimes practicing them in pairs and then having students come up before the class to act them out. These opportunities to practice very simple things like greetings help students get past their initial nervousness and can offer you a chance to see where they need more support. Many of these courses in service learning and community-based language learning tend to take place with students who are a little bit more advanced. And it is surprising to find that even at this level, they don't really know how to introduce themselves properly. And I don't mean just shaking hands, but they don't have the vocabulary for it. It's the sort of thing that you learn in like French 101, but that isn't practiced or sustained. And so it's great to come back to some of these earlier linguistic dialogues to practice that for them. In terms of teamwork, students have multiple opportunities to negotiate meaning and service-related tasks together. In the classroom setting, it can be helpful to stage these conversations, either as reflection sessions or as jigsaw activities, or even as roundtable presentations at the end. And then finally, while our students are proficient at technology and are lauded for their expertise by their partners, they are not always aware of different levels of ability and access to technology. So educating them in this area is really key. So while Joan and I have focused our comments primarily on community-based language learning opportunities today, there are a number of ways to incorporate experiential learning into a department's programming. Given declining language enrollments, departments may wish to implement these for the sheer reason of bringing more visibility to their programs, and involving students is key. The examples we presented in the poll at the beginning of our talk all provide opportunities for students to practice career readiness skills. By managing the language club's Instagram feed or becoming a departmental ambassador, students develop important communication and leadership skills, and they can also put this on their resume. And as much as we may not like that this is what motivates them, it is what motivates them in many cases, and I think we know that now. More importantly, they build community and connection among students in a minor or major. We just surveyed our senior majors, and one of the things they said they loved the most about the major was the sense of a tight community that it provided. So offering opportunities to do this is also, it comes back to the program as well. If you haven't done so yet, we also recommend talking with your career center, your colleagues in STEM and in other departments to keep pushing higher education administrators to reconsider how we are talking about language and language learning across the university. We have added a bibliography here of the works that we cited during the presentation, should you want to check out any of these sources at a later time. It's a bit long. And on that note, we would just like to thank you. We're delighted that you participated today and look forward to the next talks in the series. And we welcome any questions that you may have at this point. And I am happy to.
All right, so we have several questions actually in the Q&A. One is from Nahid Sharifi, who is asking, how can teachers support students to be a role model? What kind of support is needed?
How can they support? I'm sorry, could you repeat it one more time?
Sure. How can teachers support students to be role models? What kind of support is needed?
Working as a mentor is does require preparation. So that I applaud this question. I think that we need to really consider the maturity level of our students and to understand if they can be role models in the situation that perhaps you're considering for a partnership. There are many online resources for mentorship. And I think that there are also groups on campus within our university. The Student Affairs Office offers a lot of leadership programs, and there is expertise on our campus that you could, perhaps seek out on your campus as well, to invite guest speakers in to coach the students on what is appropriate in becoming a role model. I think one of the activities that Deb alluded to with establishing norms and kind of reviewing appropriate behaviors, that would be of paramount importance to establish expectations and to set up proper boundaries of behavior. Within our university, we also have a system in which if our university students are going to work with children, any minors below the age of 18, they actually need to go through a training on appropriate behaviors that they would they have to pass a quiz to show that they're credentialized to work with minors in their service activity. So Deb, do you have any other directions to move in for role models?
I think you really summarized it nicely. And we just did a community partner orientation this morning, and it just reminds me that the community partner is the one who needs to lead this conversation, right? What are the expectations? What does it mean to be a role model? What do they need from us? And then the boundaries are huge. Many of our students feel they want to help very much, and they think that being a role model is saying yes to everything. And that is often unhelpful. It is not a model in which it doesn't really provide any kind of sustainability autonomy for the individual with whom they're working. So I would say work with your community partner most on this question. I don't know that it falls on the professor so much as it does on the development of the MOU with the partner.
Great, thank you so much. We have a question from Flora, who is asking about the criteria that you listed earlier, and is asking whether it is necessary for every CBLL project to target all 8 criteria, so communication, critical thinking, leadership, and so on and so forth.
I don't think that is necessary, no, but I think many of them will, in fact. And I think if we think about all of the ways that our students are engaging in many of these experiential learning opportunities, it's very likely, in fact, that they will reach many of those competencies. And it certainly would behoove us to name them if they aren't meeting them.
Thank you. We have a question from Lauren, because you mentioned credits and so on earlier. She's asking, how do we combat the number of credits required for other majors that prevent students from having time in their schedules for taking a language, or when languages are not required?
I'd like to know more about that question. I wonder if Lauren would be willing to speak a little bit about that. I'm assuming that you're talking about like a chemistry major that requires 17 credits for graduation. Yeah.
I would assume yes.
We have no control over what the chemistry department, just to give that example, does as much as we might like to. And I think, you know, I don't want to become a cheerleader for languages, but I do think we can do a much better job of making visible the kinds of competencies that we are helping students to gain in the courses that we're teaching. So it sounds a bit like I'm saying that we should do a marketing pitch, but sometimes that's what you have to do.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think
I was
being an
thinking about,
advocate.
sorry.
I'm sorry, Beatrice, go ahead.
No, I was following on Deb's point, is that earlier in your presentation, you said that other departments have, at your institution, for example, have a way of marketing what they're doing in their classroom that's much better than what we sometimes do in our own departments. And one question I had for you, and I'll go back to the Q&A after that, is that how did you frame the titles of your courses in your own department to entice students to actually market your courses in a way that other departments on your campus actually do it?
The titles are very interdisciplinary.
Okay.
I think that is one of the foundational pieces here, is that we need to show how that we are relevant to other fields of study, and we need to cross list. At our institution, it's very easy to have students enroll as a Spanish course, or have them enrolled as a global health course, or, you know, we can offer the course within various credit options, and we find that really increases the interest level of the students.
Okay, great. Just a quick question in the Q&A. Somebody was interested in finding out a bit more about the deal model that you mentioned and where to actually find it.
Patty Clayton is the one of the founding people involved with the deal model. Let me put her name in the chat, because if you Google the deal model and Patty Clayton, you'll find many versions of it popping up. I can I don't know, Deb, if you found one, you could just pop in the chat. But it's a very logical sequence of types of questions. So you
describe
the process that you are providing for the students to look at different types of perspectives. That you can look at the civic engagement, you can look at the academic components of the experience, and then you also look at the personal reflection of how the student engages at the, you know, from their own starting point, where are they in terms of understanding their positionality in the community and their leadership possibilities, or how are they integrating as a team player into the experience. So the deal model can be moderated. It doesn't have to be used exactly as it's presented. So that's one of the strong points of the model, is that you can approach it from various needs according to where your students are and perhaps at what stage of the semester you're in. I like to chunk it and use different sections of the model at different points in the semester, and my students actually post on a community forum their answers to a certain series of questions. So it becomes not only a personal reflection, but that also they share it with their classmates, so that when we come together as a class, people have a few more insights into how their classmates are thinking about the service learning experience as we then discuss it as a group together.
Thank you. We have a question from Shahid, who is asking, how do you deal with with undergraduate students from varying cultures in the classroom? Any specific model for teaching diverse culture, or students from diverse cultures?
Yeah, that's such an important question, because I think our students in the United States and at our institution in particular, we're seeing a big shift. You know, I think 55% of our students are of color. We have a ton of international students coming in, and that is a big shift over the last 10 years. So acknowledging that is really important. And one of the ways to think about teaching these variety of students is understanding that everybody is not coming from the same place. And that is a really important premise, I think, to teaching that we need to remember when it comes to community-based language learning anyway. And when we have international students, it's just another reminder that we need to remember that we can't assume that everyone had the same background when they get there. So kind of a level setting can be very helpful. I'm not sure if the person asking the question is wondering about any specific issues that might be coming up for an international student versus another student who was raised in the United States. But it is true that Americans who grew up here tend to have a certain understanding of systemic, the way systems function, and the way that folks who are just arriving here do not. And so it can be helpful to spell those out so that, again, everyone understands kind of like what is happening. But I don't know that there is as much difference between an international student and a U.S. student than between a U.S. student from Miami and a U.S. student from Washington, frankly, unless I'm missing something in the question. And please feel free to jump in there.
We'll see if the person comes back and kind of modify or add to the question originally asked. We have one final question in the Q&A.
I'm gonna jump in just for a moment, because Deb and I, in our book, explore an interesting phenomenon that relates to this question of diversity of the students in the classroom, in that culture shock can be obviously between a student in an international setting, but it can also occur with students within their own local communities. So what we find is that students, because of their varied backgrounds, their varied levels of maturity, their very different life stories, a lot of times they themselves, when we go 2 miles off of campus to have a service experience, they have a very significant moment of culture shock, and they're not expecting it. And so this can happen both with students who are local students, but also students from another part of the country or international students. We find that students a lot of times are not very literate with how to navigate social services. They're not as aware about how the public schools work, because they themselves were not paying attention to the administrative, bureaucratic side of it when they were going through the system themselves. So they think that they understand a lot of the cultural contexts and kind of the barriers of access. And yet there's a whole nother level to the conversation that a lot of times they're not prepared for. And when a refugee family asks them X, Y, and Z, a lot of times they aren't prepared to give a full response, because they themselves haven't lived that, or they haven't anticipated that particular orientation based on their own identity and their own kind of tracking within the system. So there's I think that the question about diversity and inclusivity is really of high importance. And if you can crowdsource among your colleagues different ways to engage your students in these conversations, you'll be all the better for it.
Yeah. So Shahid came back and said, yeah, I actually meant for culturally diverse settings, especially in Pakistan, where he or she is joining us. And one last question. Asya is asking, and it kind of dovetails with some of the things you were just talking about. She's asking, do you have any recommendations how to approach the ethical considerations of organizing community-based language learning programs, especially with vulnerable communities? And here she's thinking about migrants or refugees. And how would you approach the ethics of service learning with students?
This is such a great question. I'm so glad you're thinking about this. It is top of my mind every day I go in to teach this class. Students need to understand the ethics of this, and they need to be aware that it is not, we're doing good in the community. I think they need to understand their role in supporting systems that sometimes are broken through this kind of work. So we really want to interrogate what is helping. What are the community's actual needs, instead of assuming that we're going to help by doing whatever it is we think we know more than the community knows. So repositioning the community as asset-based, as somebody who understands themselves and their needs better than we do. Engaging with the community in conversations around how can we do this ethically, explaining to the students that this can be fraught. It is not something that they tend to be comfortable with. My students are very uncomfortable throughout much of the semester because they realize that they are quite privileged, and it is very uncomfortable to have that mirror in front of them when they're going into some of these communities. I think we've talked a lot, and we talk a lot about this in the book as well, is using a different kind of model that is not charity-based, but is much more based on a generative kind of reciprocity, where there's a social justice orientation. And we're looking at making larger changes, interrogating, why is it that there is so much poverty, rather than just sending a check to somebody. Asking those kinds of questions, engaging students in readings. We have a number of resources at the back of the book as well, of readings that you can do with your students to interrogate these kinds of issues. I personally like to have them look at the Barbie Savior Instagram. I think it's fantastic. It's funny, and it pokes a lot of fun at students who are doing this to feel good about themselves. And that is not why we're doing this.
Yeah, great question, great answer. Well, this is it. I can't see any other questions. Maybe some people have actually did they post something? No, some participants are sharing resources between each other in the chat. But I think that's about it. So we're almost at the end of one more question popped up, sorry. So this is coming from Jabin, who is asking, do you think it would be better, for example, an ESL instructor to list anticipated problems going through their student profile when considering providing EL opportunities? Not sure what EL stand for, English language learning opportunities, or?
To list anticipated problems. Do you mean sharing with students the challenges that are going to come up in the process? Okay.
Yes.
I personally think it's great to be transparent and explicit. I think, in fact, I do that in my first couple weeks of class. We're working on role plays. I'm telling them, what are you going to do when this happens? Because it's going to happen and it's going to be uncomfortable. I think it's really helpful for students to know what they might run into. Maybe they won't run into it, and they will have great relief when they see that it's much easier than they thought, but it is much better to be prepared for these kinds of things.
I agree. The more explicit, the more proactive you can be with the range of types of experiences, the better. I think that there are going to be moments of dissonance, no matter where you start from, and it's important for students to understand that they will encounter these moments of being uncomfortable, and that the classroom is the space to talk through it and to reflect with their peers, as well as the professor and perhaps the community organizers, and that there is that expectation that you not only can challenge the model, but that there are going to be unexpected bumps in the road, that Deb and I like to many times comment that there are many teachable moments with community-based language learning, because you can only anticipate a certain range of situations, and there's always something new that happens along the way, which is very fulfilling and yet also very challenging at the same time. So
great. Well, thank you so much. I think we don't have any more questions in the Q&A. And someone was asking about your book, and Kate has provided a link to it. So, and it's also the link to your book is also on the Circle website with the description of this webinar. So if you happen to wonder where you can locate it, that's where you can find it. So I think we almost reached the end of our time anyway. So I wanted to thank our presenters, Deb Reisinger and Joan Clifford. Thank you so much for a very informative, very well organized webinar. As you can see in the webinar feedback, people are delighted by the information that you shared today with us. So with no further ado, I think I'm just going to say thank you, and on to thinking about the next one in this particular series. I think it will be all very well-rounded and lots of different information for different levels and different kinds of opportunities that can prepare students to be ready for their future careers. Thank you.
Thank you, Beatrice.